With Black Friday right around the corner, it's very important that I balance out a lot of the commentary you're going to be hearing about the Sony A80J. So today I'm going to be giving you a pros and cons list to let you guys decide for yourself once you have all the information. Now, my personal opinion on the matter is that there are better TVs like the LG C1, and if you're looking for an LED TV, maybe the Hisense U8G, to go down those routes instead, because I truly, in my personal opinion, don't feel the A80J is worth the premium price, especially when they're not beating out older TVs from 2019, like my Sony Bravia A8G. But again, that's my personal opinion on the matter after testing it. However, there are people that are just looking for information, so that's what I'll be giving you in this video. So, smack a like on this video because I'm getting to the point right now. So let's talk about the pros. Because even though I don't like the television per se for my personal needs, there are things that are very positive. One of those things are the IMAX enhanced presets for SDR and HDR. This is basically an industry first. Usually you have to select or choose between whether you're going to have IMAX enhanced for one mode or the other, and Sony this year gives you those options just for both, and I think that's really great because it really helps you get the most out of your picture quality. The IMAX picture preset is the most overpowered one, and it does end up looking the best. Now, another pro is that you have HDR tone mapping for both color and brightness. So traditionally, it usually just tries to algorithmically think on its own, not really giving you any of the options that you would hope for to fine-tune it. And here, you can kind of go in a more preference-based direction where you can choose to say, I want the best gradations, or I rather just have the most amount of peak brightness the TV can kick off in HDR. This is very important because what this is essentially saying is they're understanding that there are people who have a different preference for HDR, and they're acknowledging that from the get. And I think that's a very positive thing. Continuing with pros, you have multiple color spaces. So unlike something like the LG C1, you do have the ability to go in and select things like Adobe RGB, DCI-P3, and I think that's very important. Now, they also do have a pretty solid handle on BT 2020, and this is going to roll into the next pro, which is something called super bit mapping. Essentially, the concept behind super bit mapping is it basically gives you 14-bit gradients, and it allows you to be able to smooth out a lot of the unnatural gradation issues like banding that you're going to have when using a wider color space like BT 2020. Now, this is very important because this allows you to do very creative things, especially on PC, where you're able to force the 12-bit format, and then using super bit mapping, you're able to smooth out that gradient so that you're not losing image quality on a substantial level. So I think this is one of Sony's master features. I think this is probably the reason to own a Sony television above all else, and it is one of the most under-talked about, underrated, underutilized, and unknown features by a lot of the so-called pros out there. So I wanted to kind of bring that at least to the pro side of things because, seriously, this is one of the biggest benefits out there. Now, upscaling is another benefit that you do have on the Sony A80J. It's going to be very solid. YouTube videos are going to be very clean. It's going to upscale and almost look like a Blu-ray. It's going to be really, really clean, and I think that's wonderful. Continuing with the pros, the clarity is excellent. It's a very sharp, very detailed TV. Additionally, you do have pretty good depth. It's not the best depth that Sony has ever produced, and if you are doing comparisons with some of their older TVs, as I've mentioned, the Sony Bravia A8G from 2019, it will lose out in dynamic range, depth, and clarity ultimately, but for what it is, it's pretty good. It's a good-looking television in those regards, and if you're not doing comparisons, then you won't notice the difference either way. Now, the input lag is low. It's not as low as something like the LG C1, but it is low enough that you can call it what it is. It's good enough input lag for most people. It does also have decent internal speakers, so if you had no intentions on getting a soundbar, then c'est la vie. You don't really need it because it's decent enough to get you by. If you don't really need the earth-shattering bass, you just want good mids and trebles, this TV is going to provide that for you. It has flickerless black frame insertion, so typically with televisions, if you're unfamiliar, there's a feature called black frame insertion. They usually call it, LED motion clearness or something like that, What Sony ends up calling theirs is the X, what is it? They tend to move it around. It's not the motion flow, it's their XR reality. It's their, what, X motion clarity is what it is. Like they're always renaming these things. But you usually have an option under the X motion clarity, which unfortunately is the motion flow tab, where you can turn on a feature called clearness under custom. And what clearness basically does is enables that black frame insertion that I'm talking about. And usually on televisions, there's a lot of flicker associated with it that can trigger dizziness in some people. So it's not usually ideal to use that feature. Well, this TV doesn't have any flicker associated with it, and I think that's wonderful. Now, another benefit is that if you're using anything that's 60 FPS or higher, it's going to be smooth. So that's where Sony's motion was good. I think 60 FPS onward. Very good motion, but again, that's not really hard to do in my personal opinion because 60 FPS by default is a smooth frame rate. But either way, it is something to note that for 60 FPS content, it is going to be smooth. Okay, now let's get to the cons because there are quite a few, and this is the part where I can't do this video without putting this out there. There are only two HDMI 2.1 ports. And at first, you might think it's no big deal, but then you have the direct competitor, the LG C1, offering 4. You're paying more for this unit. That's the next con. So those two together, you're paying more and you're not getting the same amount of HDMI 2.1 ports. Is going to limit your amount of HDMI 2.1 devices you're able to use with this television. Also, there is horrible motion on anything below 60p, which means movies and 4K 60 games, or rather 4K 30 games using ray tracing. It's going to be a crap show. And by crap show, I mean there's going to be such terrible motion judder that it's undefeatable. So if you turn off motion processing because you're not a fan of the soap opera effect, get ready, buckle up, because you're going to experience the worst motion you've ever seen in your life. This TV has motion that's really that bad for movies. And then if you turn on motion processing, you're going to experience all these weird little artifacts where your image literally looks like it's breaking apart because Sony just doesn't have a handle on motion. And I think unless you're, again, only watching 60p content or higher, this is where you're going to be extremely disappointed, and this is ultimately where I was very upset with this particular television. They also removed a feature called 24p auto synchronization, which allows you to override basically the frame rate of a given content piece. So where I would love to use this feature traditionally was I would love to go into something like a video game that's running 4K 30, force the 24p option to smooth out any jitters and stuff like that, and well, they just removed that feature. It's been removed for a couple years now, and I think it's something that really does need to come back because it was one of Sony's, again, corner pieces that made them what they are, and it's just not there anymore, which is unfortunate. Continuing with the cons, they have a matte finish screen that tends to glare, so if you don't like reflections, this is not going to be your guy, because it definitely does have much in the way of reflections. There is also an overly blue hue to all colors, so Sony this year applies kind of like what feels like an Instagram filter, because there's no real way to calibrate it out. They understand that by using blue light, you are able to intensify the vibrancy of all your other colors, but the problem is that comes with the nasty effect of destroying something called your white balance, in turn destroying calibration accuracy. No matter how hard you calibrate this TV, it's never going to be as accurate as your competition, like LG OLED with the C1. And I think that's something that you need to weigh up because you're paying more for something that just by default is just going to be more blue in nature. Also, there is no motion preset option for you to choose from. All you have is custom, and you have to manually dial it in on a little slider and hope that you get the motion you're looking for. It would have been nice if Sony would have done what they did with, prior TVs like the A90J, or not the A90J, the A9G and the A8G from 2019, where they gave you motion presets and you can just choose what you want, versus having to be locked into like custom, and that's basically it. So I think that's one of the biggest downsides. I think motion presets are very fundamental for people who have different preferences and aren't really willing or really don't really feel like dialing in all that stuff manually. So that's what I'll say there. Also, there is no VRR. Now, this is something I take grand protest to because they sold the A80J on the premise of it being a next generation gaming television. However, they're not giving you the next generation features they offered, and at this point, we're closer to ending 2021 than anything else. And the fact that they don't have this feature is a massive deal breaker, especially considering day one on a lot of the other competitions. Even the new budget brands from Hisense and TCL, they're offering these VRR features day one, where a so-called big three, one of the top tier television manufacturers, Sony, can't even offer that day one. It's just really distasteful, and it's really deceptive marketing. And I feel like a similar situation like what we saw with the Sony X900H, where they promised VRR and then shortly after removed it from their website, and then nobody talks about it anymore, and I guess we're just going to let them get away with it. It just kind of seems like this is kind of what they're setting themselves up for. They're falsely advertising if they don't deliver on this feature, and so far this feature isn't here, and so they better hope that they deliver, otherwise they're going to upset a lot of people. That being said, there is also a problem with build quality as far as cons go. I would say that it's made entirely out of cheap recycled plastic. Sony's on this new Road to Zero initiative. There's no secret that Sony is more woke than most other manufacturers. They like to virtue signal and do a lot of that other stuff. And going green and all that other stuff, I guess, is one of their pushes. They go green, and they go green in the dumbest ways, in my personal opinion, by stripping ink off of your box so they don't give you the same beautiful presentation you'd have on the LG C1, or even some of the other budget options that you'd find from TCL and Hisense, where they go all out on graphics on the box. Instead, it's more minimal. It's more, it's blah. They do have more graphics on the box than the A90J, which ripped off basically all ink from the box outside of the black letters. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it would be nice to see Sony try to keep up with the marketing advertisements as far as graphic design from other manufacturers, and also the build quality. Because, again, using that Road to Zero concept and really using that as a way of cutting your cost, as if customers like myself aren't going to know that that's exactly what you did, is just really distasteful. Because at the end of the day, you should never be using recycled, reused, reclaimed plastics on a premium product that cost over $2,000. At that point, we deserve the brand new premium, top-of-the-line grade materials you can possibly afford us. And the fact that Sony is going the route of using, like, possibly piss bottles is just something I'm not going to forgive them for, because at that price range, I should be getting a discount because you're saving money, right? So pass that savings on to your customers, and maybe you'd have happier customers if you're going to go that route. Otherwise, it just seems like a greedy, cost-cutting cash grab, because you're still charging as much, and if not more, than what you used to charge. Also, they use an IR remote, so instead of using one of the nice newer technologies like Bluetooth, where you can just be anywhere in the room and you can just point at a wall that's not necessarily facing your TV, and it would pick up signal. Instead, you have to have a direct line of sight all the time. Now, this might not sound like a problem, but Sony's IR is really bad. I mean, sometimes you have to hold your arm directly out in front of you to try to get it to register. It's not a smart system, and I think it's something that slows down the claim of this so-called cognitive television. Also, the cognitive thing is a bit of a gimmick because, as I've mentioned, other TVs like my 2019 Sony Bravia A8G did end up beating out this television as far as depth and clarity, and I think that's a massive problem, dynamic range speaking, because when you think about how this cognitive thing was supposed to work, it was supposed to render things in a way we've never seen before that's closer to the human eye, and I can safely say after numerous tests, it just does not do that. In fact, the older processors were substantially better to the point where I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Now, continuing with the cons, there are forced Google terms of service. So when buying this television, if you don't like the fact that you can't just jump in, plug and play, then too bad, because they're going to make you submit to everything Google wants to say to you. And if that's not your thing, well, then this probably isn't going to be your TV. Also, there is no sports mode, so if you're somebody that likes to have a dedicated sports mode where you dial in all of your motion effects and you dial in everything for sports specifically, and then when you want to watch a regular TV, you jump right back into a regular mode, sorry to say that that's not going to happen. you're going to have to sacrifice one of your regular picture modes. I think this is one of the biggest deal breakers for a lot of sports fans, and I think it's something worth noting. But that being said, now it's up to you to decide if this is a TV that's worth your time or not, or if it's something that you're okay with. If these cons aren't really that big of a deal to you, then at this point in time, that's for you to decide. But that being said, I thought it was important that you know everything and have all the information out there. But that being said, if you have questions, ask me in the comments down below, or you can attend a live stream Friday from 7 p.m. through 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty and being a part of the community. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.